Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And we're going to continue looking at discussing the line dealing with Samuel. But before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, invite your presence here this morning as we open your word together. We know, Lord, that there's still many things that we do not understand about this line dealing with Samuel, but we are able to see how these things apply to us and our situation as Seventh-day Adventists, and our relationship to the church and to leadership and the responsibilities that you have given us. So we just pray, Lord, that as we study, you can help us see these things more clearly, and that we can receive a conviction in our lives. Be with us now. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so yesterday we started putting this story of Samuel on a line, and the difficulty that we have is exactly what magnification we're going to be on. So when we had gone through we started with Genesis, going through understanding the lines, we could recognize that there was this line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then there was Joseph, who was the fourth. That was a 3-1 combination. But we also saw that within that line, Abraham had his own line, Isaac had a line, Jacob had a line, and of course Joseph had a line. And we are running into a similar situation here as we look at these lines and we zoom out. We look at the line dealing with Seventh-day Adventism, including Millerite history, or we zoom in further to our history. We can see that we can look at our history relating to the movement, or we could look at it as relating to the church. So where we were struggling, or where we were trying to decide, was addressing the 3 calls of Samuel, and the fourth, which of course is the doubling, and we mark that as 9/11, the arrival of the second angel's message, the history of the Sunday law. But we also saw that we have a 9/11 that relates to these 3 calls. So we haven't really decided how we're going to work this out. And I've given it a little bit of thought, but I don't really know what to do exactly. So hopefully as we go through it today and maybe tomorrow, we can have something a little more solid. Now, for somebody watching this who's not really familiar with the lines, it may seem like just a bunch of silliness, a bunch of nonsense. But these lines come from Millerite history. That is, and what we haven't done here is we haven't put the arrival of the first message, formalization. We haven't marked any of that, but we have this pattern from Millerite history. So in Millerite history, 1798, at the time of the end, on February 15th, the Pope was going to be taken captive. And it was interesting because I brought up this conversation I had with Don Frost and Andrew Mosman, or Mosman. I'm not sure how you say his name. I should have asked him. And we discussed actually February 15th and the concordance. I can't remember what they said the concordance cost. They had a price of what that concordance would have cost back in 1798. But for a 16-year-old to have bought that himself, it's not very likely. And they take the same position that I do, is that it was probably his birthday present when he turned 16 that William Miller received that concordance. So his birthday is February 15th, 1798. He turned 16. Pope's taken captive on that date. And they saw the same significance with that. Now, when you think about that, uh, the fact that we have this significant birthday, and yet they seem to reject the symbolic use of numbers. I have a hard time understanding how they choose some things like this, some dates, and see them as significant, but not other dates. But anyway, that's just kind of an aside. Um, so we have, anyway, Millerite history. With the first angel's message arrives in 1798 with the Pope being taken captive. Then you have a formalization of the message uh, in 1833, connected with Miller. But within the story of Miller itself, we have this other line. We have, the battle uh, of Lake Champlain or the Battle of Plattsburgh, depending whether you use the body of water or the town that it's next to name the battle during, and that was in 1814 that happened, September 11th, that there's going to be this basically part of Miller's conversion. So there's all of these different waymarks in Miller's life that aren't part of that bigger line. But some of the waymarks in Miller's life are part of other lines. So we would expect to see the same thing. And then we have, of course, the empowerment of the first angel's message, August 11th, 1840. And then we had the arrival of the second angel. Now, initially, and when we talk about the second angel's message, this is another thing that came up in the discussion with Don Frost. The second angel's message, in a technical sense, is the message about Babylon is fallen, right? But we also have connected to that what we call the midnight cry. And the midnight cry in Millerite history is first given at Boston at midnight, halfway between the first disappointment and the great disappointment on July 21st. It's going to be given by Samuel Snow. And that's the other thing that we want to see here is this connection of Samuel with Samuel Snow, but we're going to examine that a little bit further. Just as we had a connection with Josiah Litch and the prophecy of Josiah in 1 Kings 13, verse 1 to 5, and its fulfillment in 2 Kings 23, verses 18 to 21, I think. So we saw that connection back in 2016, and here as we're dealing with Samuel, I think we need to see what this connection is with Samuel Snow, but that's something we're going to examine a bit. So the second angel is so when we talk about the second angel's messages arriving, that's when the door of probation closes for the Protestants on April 19th, 1844. So what is so done all this talking, but ask a question. What is the connection between the second angel's message, Babylon is fallen, and the midnight cry, which we attach to the second angel's message? How are these things connected? Because Don Frost, sort of seemed to take a position. We didn't go into it in detail, but that the idea that the second angel's message is the message Babylon is fallen. We recognize that. And he understood the connection with the midnight cry. So how do we understand that connection? Just any thoughts on that?
All right. When we're looking at this with the second angel's message, we can also apply that the second angel's message is the equivalent of our need for sanctification. right?
Well, because of justification, sanctification, and glorification, those three uh, waymarks are judgment, if you want, instead of glorification.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, obviously it is connected.
So it is a message that separates.
Well, every message separates.
Okay, but I'm just making sure that we have the very basics about all this.
Okay.
So the second angel's message as a separation is reinforcing the situation that calls one group away from another group. Now, we're looking at this in the light of how the second angel's message is regarding the close of probation that began to take place on April 19th, 1844.
Okay. Well, so the first angel's message separated the Protestants from the Millerites, and that's marked with the first disappointment. And in fact, many of the people who fell away that didn't accept the second angel's message because they failed the test of the first angel's message, they didn't even mark April 19th. Their disappointment would have been, March 21st. Some of them, it was January 1st, right? Depending on how they understood where Miller's prophecies ended.
Okay.
Right. So for some people, it was just like, and some people even in 1843, not even 1844. But for some people, once the year 1843 had ended, you're definitely, they're not going to be looking at 1844. They don't understand that. So not everybody followed this progression of this refining of the date. So I would say that the first angel's message actually separated and closed the probation for the Protestants. When the second angel message arrives, it's actually an announcement of a close of probation for the Protestants.
Okay.
So Babylon is fallen, is fallen. I don't know. Do you agree with that or not?
I'm not disagreeing with it.
Okay.
Now, we need to be able to recognize that with this, there's a greater call to examine the light that we have been given. Now, if we're choosing to examine that light, we're going to recognize greater light that begins to fall, that is presented for us. We're not going to turn away from the light that has gone before us.
Okay.
Now, in considering all of these points, we have a responsibility, really, to examine the past, to be able to place it properly in our present, so that we might understand more clearly that which is going to happen in our future.
Yeah. So understanding, and that's what, we're saying, that we look at Millerite history. It becomes this template. Now it is actually rather interesting. So dealing with February 15th, 1798, 46 years later to the day, on February 15th, 1844,
Okay.
In the Midnight Cry is going to be an article by George Storrs entitled Come Out of Her, My People. Right. Now, that's going to be the day before uh, Samuel Snow writes his first articles that's going to be published on February 22nd in the next issue of The Midnight Cry. So, so the question regarding the connection between this call to so we say the second angel's message arrives April 19th, right? That's when the door of probation closes. But George Storrs is going to recognize that and have an article published. As far as I know, this is the first article published in that regard, applying. Here he's applying the language of Revelation 18 to the fall of Babylon, right? But still, the idea is Babylon is fallen. So the question of how these are connected, I'm not sure that you answered my question exactly.
I don't know that I have answered your question exactly.
Okay. Okay. Do you got more thoughts on it?
No, I don't. I'm still trying to puzzle and piece this together as we're going forward.
Okay. So in a sense, we have two different messages. So the second angel's message is a doubling, right? It just the very nature of the message. But it's going to have two aspects. Babylon is fallen, and behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And these two are connected together. We can see, well, the fact that George Storrs is going to have this article on February 15th, 1844, for a call to come out of Babylon, right? Come out of her, my people. We can see that just as there's this progression of a message that Snow is going to have, right? So first he's going to, on January 1st, he's going to decide that he's going to present this idea that Jesus is coming back in the fall, that the prophetic periods end in the fall of 1844, not in the spring. And the closeness of the dates here, February 15th and February 16th. And then the symbolism of February 15th for George Storrs' article. So in some ways, you could argue that the second angel's message arrives 46 years later to the day, right? I mean, you could argue that the call to come out of Babylon happens on February 15th, 1844. Right? I mean, you could argue that. But definitely it's the close of probation for the Protestants is April 19th, right? Because once those prophetic periods have passed, then there isn't, they've failed the first message. They did not receive it, so they can't be benefited by the second. So only those that have accepted the chronology of April 19th. Because if you were disappointed on March 21st, then you don't understand the chronology that would mark October 22nd, 1844 as the 10th day of the seventh month, right? You would have September 23rd as the 10th day of the seventh month. So any other thoughts on how these two messages are connected? Because we always keep talking about the second angel's message, and then we talk about, of course, the parable of the 10 virgins, the midnight cry.
So my thoughts are that Miller was preaching the hour of his judgment has come. So relating to the second coming. So that was rejected. And so they have fallen because they rejected it. And then behold, the bridegroom was coming. relates to that message that Miller had preached about Christ's second coming.
Okay.
So that's, in a sense, taken up again after the initial disappointment.
Okay. Okay. So what you're saying, if I could put it sort of into my own words. So we have the first angel's message. And when that message is rejected, their probation closes. And so the second angel's message, even though it includes the idea that Babylon has fallen, that is, the first angel's message has been rejected. Its main part of its message in Millerite history is that Christ is coming. Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him, the midnight cry. So you have the first message, which Ellen White says parallels that of the virgins going out with, their lamps, and then, of course, they're going to fall asleep, right? And then you have the second angel's message is going to be, once they wake up, and I'm trying to think how she words it, but anyway, it's going to be that period of time where they prepare, and we have the separation of those two groups. Now, back in 2017, when we were looking at Samuel Snow's letters, and so the one thing I haven't really looked at is, we've looked at Samuel Snow's letters, and of course I have here, George Storr's article, and I did do some examination into that, but I didn't really think much about the dates of George Storr's articles or how they fit into the lines. But anyway, when we go back to 2017, we're going to understand Samuel Snow's letters, and we're going to understand the two Passovers. So the Passovers that the Jews had, which is going to be for the republication of Samuel Snow's first article. So it's going to be written February 16th, one day after George Storr's article is published in The Midnight Cry. And then 6 days later, after February 16th, when he writes that first letter, it's going to be published 1 week after George Storr's article in The Midnight Cry. Right, so they're published on Wednesdays. The Signs of the Times are published on Thursdays. So it gets published on a Wednesday, February 22nd. It gets republished on a Thursday, April 3rd, which is the Passover in 1844, that the Jews and the Karaites, both the Rabbinic and Karaite Jews, observed. So they observed the Passover, having March 21st as the first day of the first month. But the Millerites had come to understand that the first day of the first month would be April 19th. So they weren't really disappointed on March 21st. They'd already moved that date. They didn't wait till March 21st and then said, oh, well, we think it's actually April 19th. They already had moved it earlier. So those that were disappointed on April 19th and did not continue in the message, obviously they wouldn't have continued following. Now, it's hard to know how many people fell away at these different points, right? We don't have documentation about individuals. We just know that the numbers definitely dwindled. But it seems to me those that accepted April 19th as the first day of the first month would have been benefited by Samuel Snow's message. Like if they continued, they had the background to understand this progression or unfolding of these messages. And so we have all of this chronology that Snow's going to present really does make sense if you had been following along, right? So people are following on along the way. But it seems to me that people who accepted April 19th have at least the foundation to accept the second angel's message, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. So that's connected to the fact that probation has closed, that is, the second angel's message arrives. But I would think that we would need to say that the second angel's message in Millerite history is not really the call to come out of Babylon, but it's really the message of the parable of the 10 virgins. So we know the door of probation closes for the Protestants, but the primary message that they're giving in that tarrying time is the message of Samuel Snow. But these two messages are connected. So, I mean, that's me putting it into my own words, sort of, Stephen. But does that make sense? Do you agree with how I sort of worked my way through that? Or am I off from what you said?
Nothing's really coming up on my radar that I disagree with what you're saying.
Yes, but the basic idea is that we had this first angel's message. The second angel's message is focusing upon that Christ is coming October 22nd, 1844. It's not focusing upon the fact that Babylon has fallen. That's part of it. But the main focus is, that Christ is coming. Obviously, they are leaving the Protestant churches. Well, they're getting kicked out. They've been getting kicked out for a while. I mean, one of the reasons that they ended up having the Great Tent, for their camp meetings, was previous to 1842. Miller and his associates were preaching in Protestant churches. But as those doors began to close, their opportunity to go places and present the message was limited. But by having this tent, they could go into any city and set up the tent and hold meetings there, right? So that's part of the reason. So that's going to happen, in 1842. That's why we had said, the movement had said in the past, that the second angel's message arrived in 1842, the summer of 1842. But we moved that in 2014. We moved that to April 19th. Any thoughts on that? Do you see kind of why there's these two messages that we sort of don't differentiate them, but they're connected, and I don't know if we've really ever discussed this before. I don't remember thinking about it in this way anyway. I mean, were we correct in saying that the second angel's message arrived April 19th rather than February 15th, 1844, or even in the summer of 1842?
Well, Ellen White, she mentions the disappointment, the first disappointment, and then she mentions the angel coming down with the writing in the hand afterwards. So to me, it's that angel's descending on April 19th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the fact that the Protestants begin closing their doors, I mean, there's this process that's going on prior to the close of probation, but basically it has to be, their close of probation has to be April 19th. The fact that George Storrs is presenting this message prior to April 19th doesn't mean that the door of probation has closed. In fact, it shows that it would still be open. And that their primary message in 1844, after April 19th, is going to be the midnight cry. So that's going to be the second angel's message, is embodied or expressed, even though we have the idea Babylon is fallen, it's still going to be expressed or worked out event-wise in these two different dates: July 21st, when the Midnight Cry is first given in Boston, and August 15th, when the Midnight Cry is empowered at Exeter. So we have these words, Babylon is fallen, but it's expressed with these two dates, the midnight and the midnight cry, which we take as a doubling. So we have that in Millerite history. And then we have the third angel arriving October 22nd, 1844. So that's the template that we're working in. But we can see that there is these two messages that are tied together. And as again, I'm just saying, I don't think we ever really addressed it in this way before. I mean, we have discussed about when the second angel's message arrived. But how is it that the parable of the 10 virgins, behold, the bridegroom cometh, is connected to Babylon is fallen, is fallen? I think it's the natural progression because of the rejection of the first angel's message. So it's really pronouncing that sentence or judgment upon the Protestants who are not going to be benefited by the second angel. But we know that even though they had this from Revelation 18, come over to her, my people, that really that's not the message of Revelation, the second angel of Revelation 14, right? So in the second angel of Revelation 14, it's just that Babylon is fallen, right? Just the words are, there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, right? But nothing about coming out of her, my people. That's Revelation 18. And then just quickly follows the third angel, and the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image. So the third angel's message is regarding the mark of the beast, the Sunday law, but that arrives October 22nd, 1844. Now, we have another question. How is it that it arrives October 22nd, 1844, the third angel's message arrives, when Adventists aren't yet Sabbath keepers?
Well, in a similar way that you had George Stores bringing the second angel's message before the close of revelation or the arrival of the second angel, you had, I think it's somebody called Wheeler preaching the Sabbath. So he was influenced by the Baptist lady Oates, Rachel Oates.
Yeah.
So that in a sense there was that Sabbath message occurring prior to the 22nd of October. Now most people didn't really accept it or receive it at that time.
Yeah.
But it was still being, I'd say there had been some Millerites already keeping the Sabbath then prior to the October 22nd.
Yeah, and this brings up another point. Like when it comes to marking a waymark, now when we think about a waymark, what is a waymark? Where does the term come from?
I think it's in Proverbs, but it says landmarks. Remove not the ancient landmarks, which thy fathers have set. But it might have come for a previous. I think it does.
Yeah, so it's a landmark, right? We call them waymarks, but they're landmarks. So they would be, like nowadays we have surveyor markings, right? They put a steel post in the ground and it has a little brass piece at the top, which has some information about it, usually, the location of it. longitude and latitude, and sometimes has lines marking where property lines are from that post if it's a corner of a property line. So they mark borders, right? They mark borders or edges of things. Now, when I was in British Columbia this summer, I went to see my brother David's house, because he died in 1990, and I'd helped build the place, and it kind of had become a bit dilapidated when I saw it back in 2011. I'd driven by there, but I noticed on Google Earth that it looked like it had been fixed up, so I went there to see the place. And anyway, the guy was asking me about where the property line was, and we had figured out, by walking around the property, that the neighbors had taken over about a quarter of his property. So where they were parking their cars and most of their yard was actually on his property, and there was this little surveyor marking, which was by the cabin where my son Matt was born, that he had found, right? And so he had said, well, it should be this many yards, and I went and measured it, and it was in the neighbor's yard when I measured. And so I said, yeah, you're correct. So anyway, the thing about a border marking, a waymark, is it helps mark a border, but a border isn't always well defined. That is, unless you have a waymark, you may not recognize where the border is, because there's natural activities, like the fact that my brother David nobody was living there since like 1991 or 92 or something like that. That the neighbors, they slowly encroached on that property, and nobody noticed. And so when the property was then sold, the guy didn't realize that he actually had a much bigger property than it looked. So when it comes to these waymarks that we have, like April 19th, that's like a surveyor marking, but the border isn't always historically as precise as that, if you understand what I'm saying. So for instance, dealing with the conversation I had with Don Frost, discussing 1798. Well, they wanted to say that, atheism, France wasn't atheistic on February 15th, 1798. We had a bit of discussion about that earlier in our studies here, which I thought was really like being extremely nitpicky and not recognizing that France is Sodom and Egypt. And even if technically you could argue that they weren't, officially atheist at that point, that doesn't change anything, because the waymark is February 15th, 1798. That's the time of the end. And there's this sort of where the border is, it's a little fuzzy sometimes, right? Same thing with 508, because Clovis, he's not a pagan. He's an Aryan, and the nations are all Aryan. The paganism is basically faded away by the time Clovis is baptized on December 25th, 508. Yeah, Angela, you have some thoughts? Or not?
Oh, see, I was just clearing my throat, but I did chat something, and then as I was chatting, my net went down, so I missed a lot about what you're saying. But I think what I said is valid in chat.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you put a chat in there. I didn't look at it yet. Okay, 1 Samuel 4:19, dealing with April 19th, 1844. So we haven't got to chapter 4 of 1 Samuel yet, but I'll look there. Okay, so that's where they capture the ark. Okay. And then the death of Eli in connection with it. And his daughter-in-law Phinehas' wife was with child near to be delivered, and when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. Okay. And it's going to be in verse 21 where she names the child Ichabod, saying the glory is departed. Right? That's just simply taking kabod, which is glory, and departed galah, and adding some other prefixes and stuff to it. So, so you have written here, scattering of heathen according to language groups in Genesis 11, scattering of Babel, of doctrinal groups, regathering of true Protestants is the counter action against the resurgence of the papal new Roman Empire, which will be global through infiltration, subversion, and Tyre singing like a harlot. Yeah, so dealing with the Sunday law. Yeah, so we can take all of these types from the Old Testament and we can lay them down in these progression of events that lead to Millerite history. But when we have these specific dates as waymarks, they're marked as waymarks prophetically in God's word. They may not be the events, like events don't usually all just happen on one day. There are some that do, like obviously 9/11 or 11/9, October 22nd. But there are things where you could choose different dates, but there is prophetic symbols attached to those dates of why we choose those dates. And they often would be different than the world might see prophetic history. So for instance, we have August 11th, 1840, which, is the predicted date for the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Technically, the Ottoman Empire falls on November 1st in 1920 or 22. I can't remember. I always forget. And so, people will mock the message and saying, well, nothing happened on, August 11th, 1840, or at least not what, they think that should be what's being marked by that event. But we can look at a waymark and we can see that a waymark has things that lead up to it, but there is a specific thing that marks that waymark, right? So in Millerite history, you have the first day of the first month. That's your waymark. Person could argue, well, the first disappointment was earlier or whatever, but we know that that's the extremity of Miller's prediction. We have the fact that the probation closes in a very technical sense on that date. Because if you're continuing past April 19th, that means you are accepting light that would not be part of the first angel's message, since Miller's prediction doesn't pass beyond that. If you're going to continue on that, beyond that date, you are accepting light. You're still walking in that light of the first angel's message. And it seems, from what I read of history, is that those that accepted the second angel's message had continued after April 19th. The people that had fallen away, what happens in Boston, what happens in Exeter, doesn't bring those people back, right? They've already made their decision. They've already mocked, many people who are part of the message begin to mock the Millerites. And Samuel Snow is going to address that in his May 1st letter. Which his May, I think I'm getting that right. Just hang on. Where he addresses the mocking. Yeah. Okay, is that sort of helpful? I mean, right now we're looking at these events in Millerite history and discussing them. And then when we look at the events in our history, yeah, actually, I think I got that backwards. I think the Signs publishes on the Wednesday, and yeah, the Signs publishes on a Wednesday, and the Midnight Cry on the Thursday. Or did I say that before? Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, the Signs of the Times is on the Wednesday, and the Midnight Cry is published on Thursday. Okay, so anyway. So now when we look at these waymarks that we've taken from Samuel, we still have this problem of addressing the three calls. So for me, the three calls seem to be attached to, let's see, I would put them as attached to our 3 dates. This is how I would do it. November 9th, 1980, 2019, July 18, 2020, and December 25th, 2021. And the Samuel as the Sunday law itself. That at least on one level, I would think that that's how I would do it. Any thoughts on that? If we do that this way, we have the time of the end, man of God, right? We have this Sunday law, which we always say arrives at 9/11. Well, we say it arrives at 9/11. That is the mighty angel of Revelation 18. But we know that 9/11 is really the empowerment of the first angel. So, and that really we would move the Sunday law to the actual Sunday law itself on one line. But I'm not sure how we would do that. Maybe I'm not making any sense. Because we talked about that we could just take the 3 calls having to do with the 3 angels' messages in Millerite history, and then the Samuel is our history. So can we do that? Do we overlap these in some way? If we have the 3 angels' messages in our history, how do we address with the Samuel, the second angel?
Well, what would you do then with the elect being taken? You know, to establish the Sunday law later?
Yeah, so when we start to continue to go through Samuel, either we're going to have repetitions of these lines, right? Or we're going to like be zooming out or zooming in. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what we would do there. But yeah, so the ark being taken, we say that the glory is departed. And we also say that that's at 9/11. So it seems to me that the line of Samuel is addressing our history as the second angel arriving to empower the third angel. So these lines must be overlapping in some way. That is, we're zooming into different magnifications. But yeah, at this point, we have to decide how we're going to deal with this whole story, right? Because we got the story up. So this is focusing upon Samuel. The calls of Samuel himself is chapter 3. But we also are including, Hannah's prayer, the birth of Samuel. And so how we're going to fit that together, how we're going to lay these out as they relate to each other and as they relate to the bigger line. That's where I'm having the struggle. I haven't found something that's really satisfactory as far as it falls into place naturally, because that's what we want to see. But maybe in some ways we need to just continue progressing through the rest of the story. Okay, well, let's take a look at the rest of chapter 3 first. And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. To do justice and judgment. Wait, that's not where I want to be. And Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, here am I. So what about opening the doors of the house of the Lord? What parallel would that be? Would we put that as the arrival of the third angel's message in Millerite history? Or is there something else? And Eli's going to call Samuel this time, and Samuel's going to respond as he had responded the first 3 times that God called him, here am I. So how do we deal with this? And I find it significant that I once planned to do a sermon called 3:16, and because there's lots of very significant verses in the Bible that can be tied together that are 3:16, like John 3:16, lots of other ones. That's it. Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:16, 1 Timothy, I can't remember. Tons of different 3:16s. But anyway, we have these 2 verses. Okay, Angela just asks about 3 waymarks. See, I wouldn't put the purchase, so she talks about 11/9/89, the Time of the End magazine, but the purchase of the property at the School of the Prophets in 2013 or 2011. One is I don't know when the property was purchased. I don't have that date. I know he received money in 2011 to purchase property. When it was purchased, I don't know. And I've never been able to figure that out. But also, I don't know if I would put that specifically as a waymark. We have when he received the money as a waymark, but I don't know if I would put it as like a group of 3 waymarks. But anyway, so getting back to these verses here, Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. So what about the morning? Any significance in the morning?
Would we look at that as being?
Okay,
Go ahead, Dwight.
Go ahead, Angela.
No, I was just saying, well, the first verse that came to me was joy cometh in the morning. Then I was thinking, the day dawn rise in thy heart. Like I get these scatterings of verses, right? So it's the dawn of truth. It's the opening of the heart to God, or to more from God.
Okay, Dwight?
I was looking at it being symbolically as to light that comes after the night.
Okay. So in Millerite history, when is the morning?
Wouldn't we have thought the morning as occurring when Miller began to give his warning message, but greater light, greater morning came after April 19th, 1844?
Okay, so morning comes after midnight, right?
Correct.
So when is the morning in 1844?
Would that be the 15th of Now that's Midnight Cry is 15th of August. So would the morning be October 22nd, 1844?
Okay, so that's going to be for this is a little bit difficult for people to grasp, but if you go to Jerusalem and you use Jerusalem as the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844, if you use the relationship of the moon for determining when the 10th day of the 7th month is, in 1844, October 23rd would have actually been the 10th day of the 7th month. October
Right.
26th would only be the 10th day of the 7th month if you use the moon in the United States on the eastern seaboard there. So the Millerites seem to use, they didn't fully understand how the calendars worked and how to determine exactly when the month and the year began and so forth. But basically, if you're going to use April 19th as the first day of the first month, you could only do that if you're using Boston. If you use Jerusalem, it would actually have started one day later. So that means the 10th day of the 7th month would have been October 23rd. But it's interesting, on the morning of October 23rd, so they have their disappointment October 22nd. They have the correct date according to local time. And I've made an argument that the way that God's calendar is to work is to work from local time, not from Jerusalem. Right? If you don't live in Jerusalem, you can't know when, now we have the internet and all that. But if in the past, you wouldn't have known what the time was. You would have to go locally. You would do that for your Sabbath. You would do that for the feast days. Right? You would follow your local time. So anyway, when Hiram Edson is in the cornfield and he has this vision of Christ moving from the holy to the most holy, one is it's in the morning, but in Jerusalem it would have been at the end of the Day of Atonement in Jerusalem. So the point is, he would have been seeing, based on Jerusalem time, he would have been seeing Christ moving from the holy to the most holy at the correct time. So I have this argument because some people have tried to show, that, October 23rd should have been the Day of Atonement if we follow the same rules that we use to have Jesus crucified on a Friday in 31 AD, right? And I agree with them, except that the Millerites are using local time. And if you use local time, then October 22nd. But the morning then that the doors are opened, is that not October 22nd, 1844? You understand what I'm saying?
It makes sense.
Yeah, because midnight is obviously the middle of the night. That means the first day of the first month is sunset, and October 22nd, 23rd, that's going to be sunrise. That's going to be the morning. And the word there that's used for morning is the one that's the evenings and mornings. It's boker, right? So that's the dawn, right? So Samuel ate until the dawn, until the boker, and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. So we could see that would mark the arrival of the third angel's message. Now, and it says, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. What vision is that?
Well, it's funny it says a vision and not the speech. Did he have a vision when Christ was speaking, or the angel was speaking to him? It sounds like maybe he did.
Well, it was God that came to him, right? So, but the vision here is what word?
It's Marah, I think.
Yeah,
Mar,
it's the looking glass vision.
yeah.
It's the mirror, right?
So it's a vision of Christ.
Yeah, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's that looking glass, right? The marah, not the mareh, but the marah. Okay. So does that make sense to place that in connection with the third angel's message?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's not going to be the kazone. It's not going to be the mareh, the vision of the evenings and mornings. It's going to be the marah. So when Eli calls Samuel and says, Samuel, my son, and he answers, here am I, what's happening here? So we have Samuel, he lays until the morning. He's going to see, this is Hiram Edson, we could argue maybe, having the vision in the cornfield, right? And that's going to be the Marah vision. So when Eli calls Samuel and Samuel responds, what is this? We've already talked about it before. So we connected this with Ezekiel. Okay, so Ezekiel chapter 20, the 10th day of the 5th month, certain of the elders of Israel come to inquire of the Lord. Now, so we can connect this to Millerite history, but we can also connect it to our history. Now, in our history, we have the message of Samuel Snow as applied to our time, right? That is, it's going to be the message of Samuel Snow that's going to give us July 18, 2020, right? Samuel Snow's letters, the last letters published on July 18, 1844. It's part of a structure that we repeat in our history from June 9th to October 13th in 2018. Right? It's going to parallel Samuel Snow's letters. And it's going to relate, of course, also to November 9th, 2019, plus July 18, also December 25th, 2021. So if we're going to have this connection between Millerite history and our history, what do we have to do? What are we saying about Samuel Snow's message and our message? Because if it's morning, that's going to be the morning of the great disappointment, right? But there's going to be this vision, right, that Hiram Edson sees. Of course, Samuel Snow doesn't have that vision, but it's connected to his prediction, right? Behold, the bridegroom cometh on the 10th day of the 7th month.
So it's a vision that humbles us from the dust.
Okay. So can we connect this to the July 18, 2020 message?
What comes to my mind as well is Isaiah chapter 6.
Okay. Yeah.
Because he has that vision of the throne room.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says,
yeah,
here am I, send me. So you have that, here am I, or here I am. It's quite similar.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have in the year King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Right. So we have this same thing. The doors of the house of the Lord are opened up. We can see that this parallels Hiram Edson, seeing Christ moving from the holy to the most holy, right, on October 23rd, the morning of October 23rd. Um, and then he's going to say, woe am I, in verse 5, for I'm undone, right? So this is a revelation of Christ. And then there's going to be this commission. I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, here am I, send me, right? Okay. So there's a lot more to that chapter, but people can see what Stephen's talking about, right? How this is connected. Any more thoughts?
Yes, quite clearly now.
Okay. Stephen, any more thoughts on
But I
that?
noticed there was a shaking too. Those doors, the doorposts shook. So yeah, the message causes a shaking.
Yeah. Now, what about this reference to the year that King Uzziah died?
Jeff, I remember, connected that to the United States because during Uzziah's reign, Israel had its greatest prosperity since the time of Solomon. So the United States being the foremost industrial rich nation in the world. So he connected that, the death of Uzziah then to being like the end of the United States in some way.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. Now, Uzziah means Jehovah is my strength. I'm just looking at some things here. And that's Oz, right? That's that one word where we get power or strength or majesty. And they break the pride of your power. And then the Yah part, which is just part of Jehovah. Ozya. Messiah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure that I agree with Jeff on that one.
Well, it could be as long as the U.S. has its constitution and wants to follow the constitution, then God will uphold it. But when they are speaking, I mean, you can read the headlines. They're definitely speaking. Well, we're going to get rid of this part of this amendment, Section 11 or whatever the heck it was. I have it somewhere in my files. Like they are being pretty blatant about it. We have to get rid of different parts of the Constitution because of such and such. I mean, they're whittling away at it and whittling away with it, and they will get rid of it if they have to put in the Sunday law. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't see how that relates to the year that King Uzziah died. I don't know if I would put that as the United States. Maybe I'd have to see more. Because to me, it's sort of marking a waymark, right? So we got the year that King Uzziah died. That he's gonna have this vision. Now, Isaiah has begun his ministry earlier. He's already been involved in receiving messages from God. But he has this vision. So now, so when would this be? How long is this before the vision of chapter 7? So the vision of chapter 7 is going to be, or chapter 7 is going to be in the first year of Ahaz.
Yeah, so I think you have Jotham in between.
Yep.
So I think he reigns for 16 years. So it's
Yeah.
16-year gap, roughly.
Yeah, it's about 16 years. Now it's interesting that the name Uzziah, it's 5818, and it is it's a little bit less than 16 years. So it's going to be, I think it's 58 days less. Let me think here. So I'll just show you what I'm doing. It'll be more interesting for you to watch what I'm doing. Okay, so here's my calculator. Here, standard. So if we take 5818 and we divide it by 16, you're going to get 363. So it's not 16 full years. I could also take 5818 and divide it by 360. And when I do that, I get 16 years plus, I believe it's, let me see here. So I'd have to subtract those two. Let me see. So 57. Yeah. So I'd go 5818 minus 5760, and that's going to be 50. Well, no, that's not. I did that. What did I do wrong? Did that wrong. 5818 minus 5760. That's going to be 58 days difference. And then if I, so that's prophetic years. 16 prophetic years, 5818 is 58 days more. But if I take 16 times 365 and a quarter, I get 5844 minus 5818. That's going to be 26 days difference. Okay. So the point is it's almost 16 years. Now we don't know exactly in that period of time, but can we put 16 years anywhere in our lines? That maybe 5818 days affects something. So this is just a process.
Not recalling anything that we have approached with 16 years. Unless we're
What about 2000? Sorry, right. 2014 to 2030, maybe?
Well, what I was just thinking was 2001 to 2017.
Yeah, so that brings us, if we do an inclusive count, it brings us to August 15th, 2017.
Which makes that interesting because if that brings us to August 15th of 2017, that brings us 7 years later to August 15th of 2024.
Mhm. Yeah. So, but anyway, I mean, um, we have 16, we could just say it's approximately 16 years, but exactly where we'd fit it in it, I don't know. But it's just a thought, something to keep in the back of our minds. Yeah. So those are the types of things I do, right? I look at, so. Okay, so we still have lots of things we need to sort out. But we're going to say that this is connected with, so we have 16 years, whether we just take that 16 years, King Uzziah dying, that's going to connect to the 16 years when the prophecy of the 65 years is then going to be given. So we could just connect it that way. I wish I knew the exact dates, because then, it'd be neat if it was exactly that many days. But that message then is a message that precedes the giving of the 2520, right? So Isaiah chapter 6, which is 16 years before Isaiah chapter 7. And Isaiah chapter 7 is going to give us the starting of the two 2520s. And the vision that we're dealing with, that Samuel feared to show Eli the vision, that is the Marah vision. So why is Samuel fearful to show Eli the Marah vision? The looking glass vision.
Because it spoke of judgment on him and his household.
Okay, well, so, Eli already knows about this judgment. Does Samuel know? We don't know whether Samuel knows about what was said, other than that God says that he's already proclaimed this stuff to Eli. So Samuel should know that Eli already knows about it. But if we apply it to our message at this time, is there a fear of showing the message to the leadership that we could parallel? And where would we parallel that? And I'm not saying it's bad that he fears to show it, right? It's not like he's not going to show the vision to Eli. He is, but he's going to have this fear. It's not going to stop him. But Eli's going to call him. So where would we place this? And this type of fear, Yareh, is the type of fear that you would have before, like God, or before some superior, sometimes translated as reverence, dread. But morally, it means to revere. So this is not, he's not like scared in not to do something. It's just reverence. So is this the message of the loud cry? The third angel's message as it's been empowered by the second angel. Any thoughts?
Thinking about it.
Okay.
Interesting. It's the way in which you're presenting this. I mean, it takes a little bit to consider that comparison.
Well, there's lots of different connections, right? So
Right,
we
there
have, so we have the third angel's message arriving October 23rd, 1844. We're paralleling that to our message. And that this is the third angel's message being proclaimed in our history. But Samuel fears to show the leadership. And we would say that Samuel represents a message connected with this movement. But exactly where we're going to place that, then Eli is going to call Samuel. So we've already said that this inquiry is in connection with the symbolism of July 18, 2020, right? So when we first get this July 18th date, it's a Julian date in 2020, which is July 31st on the Gregorian calendar, but it follows July 18 by 30 days. So it follows the Gregorian July 18. We make a prediction, that prediction fails, but that prediction parallels October 22nd, 1844. And so that the message that we've been developing since then is the Mara vision, right? That's what it is. It's the message of the revelation of Christ. And this movement has a fear to show this or to give this message, not in that it's scared to give it, but because of the reverence it has, the importance of this message. Right? And I would say that we do, in a sense, we take this message very seriously. I would say one of the things that I really have disliked about the way that most people in the movement had treated this message, and I'm just going to talk about the Canadian American group and how they have dealt with this topic. I don't think that they have treated it with reverence. Right? I think that people are, this could seem kind of harsh, but just the way that we talk about the truth, the way we talk about the message, the sort of mocking we do of others, the sort of jesting and joking that goes on. I think that we don't take this message seriously. Samuel does, right? So the idea that he feared to show it to Eli is not about being scared what's going to happen to him or anything. It's because of the seriousness of the message, the reverence that he has for the message, that it's a message from God, right? Any thoughts?
The point is, let us recall that this is a youth of 12 years old.
Yeah.
He's had many years away from his family in the service of God, but he knew not the voice of God. So here's Samuel. He is surprised. He is shocked. God, Jehovah, is directly speaking to him and not to Eli, not to the ordained high priest of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah, the church has been passed by.
the church and the leadership directly of the church have been passed by.
Mhm.
So Samuel is given a message that that Jehovah is going to do something that is going to make the ears of all that hear of it tingle. It's going to be something that is going to create great consternation.
Right, and we connected to 2 Kings 21:12,
Right.
which connects us to 2012 to 2021. It connects us 21 times 12 is 252, and that's going to be in connection with stretching the line of Samaria over the line of Jerusalem, right? The 225:20s. So it relates to this movement's message directly.
Correct.
Okay. So we have all these connections.
The situation that we have here is not unlike different points that Mrs. White was trying to make with the church. Now, Samuel is going to have to give a message of warning that is going to lift the veil, so to speak. Mrs. White attempted to give a warning that was largely ignored in 1901 when she wrote, "The energies of the church have been fettered, cut away the bands. There's a great deal of rough, hard work to be done, but because of this, the worker must not grow rough and uncourteous, unlovely in speech and action. Let everyone in God's service strive to be as pure and as holy as the Master. Let God's people act so that the world will see that Seventh-day Adventists are an intelligent, thinking people whose faith is based on a surer foundation than the bedlam of confusion. The people are hungry for the bread of life. Do not offer them a stone. God requires his servants to give the people pure spiritual food." This is what's not been happening since 1863.
Yeah, and so God passed by the church, and
Exactly.
now, we've been given a message that we have to give, and we've given part of it, right? Obviously, in the proclamation of July 18, 2020.
Right.
And then I think about the 12 years as well. I mean, if we take 12 prophetic years, that goes to the previous Sabbath, October 19th, which was Iran's birthday. Which is interesting. Because that goes from the prophetic mirror from December 21st, 2012. That's 4,320 days. So on the Mayan calendar, it's 13/0/12/00, right? So that was October 19th. I was going to mention it then, but I forgot all about it. But the 12 years dealing with Samuel being 12, I just think about that. That, we have that 12 years in that line, which is the time we're in. So that's the prophetic time. Obviously, December 21st would be the end of that 12 years on the Gregorian calendar. Anyway, our time is up, but we're going to come back to this tomorrow. But we can see that here Eli is going to call Samuel. And so when that message is going to be given, that there's actually going to be an inquiry, which that is the message that we're going to give is going to be asked for some reason when the leadership wants to hear it. But it's still going to be a message of judgment. So I don't know what that means, how that's going to unfold. But we have that clearly marked in Ezekiel, and we have it marked here. Okay, so any final thoughts before we close with prayer?
No.
I'd like to know where Dwight found that quote.
He put it in the chat.
Oh, he did. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time we've had this morning. We pray for your continued presence in our lives. We feel the weight and the burden of the responsibility to reflect your character to all, to study and understand your word, and that we will have an answer to give to all who ask. We ask, Lord, that the trials that we are experiencing will make us stronger in dependence upon you, that we can know that you are always there. Be with us throughout this day and bring us together again to study your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.